The coldness of space pressed against the windows of the colony ship Endeavour. Inside, Captain William Carter stood alone on the bridge. His eyes were fixed on the message that still glowed on the main screen. He had read it over 20 times, now, but the words never changed. Mission terminated. Resources prioritized elsewhere. Godspeed. William's hand curled into a fist. 5,000 people. The United Earth government had abandoned 5,000 people to die in the emptiness between stars. The ship had been damaged 3 weeks ago. An asteroid, too small for their sensors to detect early enough, had struck their main power core. The Endeavour was still moving toward Proxima Centauri b, but at a speed that would take decades to reach the planet. Their life support systems were failing. They had 3 months of oxygen left, maybe 4 if they were lucky. William walked away from the screen and looked out at the stars. Earth was just a tiny blue dot from here, barely visible among countless others. How could they do this? The mission had been planned for years. The settlers had trained, sold their homes, said goodbye to loved ones who would be long dead by the time they reached their new home. And now they were just being left to die. A soft knock on the door broke his thoughts. "Captain, you should get some rest," said Dr. Susan Miller, the ship's chief engineer. Her face was tired, with dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept much since the accident. "Have you made any progress?" William asked, though he already knew the answer. Susan shook her head. "I've tried everything I can think of. We can stretch our supplies, turn off life support in unused sections, but without a rescue." Her voice trailed off. "There won't be a rescue," William said quietly. "They've written us off." "The people deserve to know," Susan said after a long silence. William nodded slowly. "I'll tell them tomorrow. They deserve one more night of hope. On Earth." In the quiet hours of night at the lunar relay station, Alan Hayes sat up suddenly in his chair. He had been half asleep during his shift, monitoring the deep space communications that rarely showed anything interesting. But now a light was blinking on his console, a distress signal. Alan put on his headphones and adjusted the signal. At first there was only static, but then a voice broke through, weak and distant. "This is the colony ship Endeavour. We have suffered critical damage to our power systems. Request immediate assistance, 5,000 souls aboard. Repeat, this is the Endeavour." Alan frowned. The Endeavour? That mission had been cancelled months ago due to technical problems. At least that's what the news had reported. But this signal was real, coming from deep space. He recorded the message and took it to his supervisor, Paul Grant, who was drinking coffee in the break room. "Sir, I picked up a distress call from the Endeavour," Alan said, holding out the data. Paul's face changed the moment he saw the name. He took the pad and listened to the message, his expression growing darker. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice suddenly cold. "It just came through on the deep space array," Alan explained. "Aren't we going to report it? They need help." Paul deleted the recording from the pad. The Endeavour mission was scrubbed before launch. This is obviously some kind of prank or system error. "But sir, I heard their voices. They're really out there. Delete the original recording from your station and forget you ever heard it," Paul said firmly. "That's an order, Hayes. Some joker is playing games and we don't need to start a panic over nothing." Alan returned to his station, confused and troubled. But he didn't delete the recording. Instead, he copied it to his personal device. Something wasn't right, and he couldn't just ignore 5,000 people calling for help. On the Endeavour, the ship's counselor, Linda Brown, was holding a group session in what had once been the recreation hall. 20 settlers sat in a circle sharing their fears. "My daughters keep asking when we're going to reach our new home," said Mary Parker, a farmer who had brought her family to start a new life. "I don't know what to tell them anymore." "Tell them the truth," said Ben Howard, an older man who had been a teacher back on Earth. "That we're doing everything we can," Linda nodded. "It's important to be honest, especially with children. They can sense when adults are hiding something." The door opened, and Dr. Miller walked in. Everyone turned to look at her, hope in their eyes. She had become a symbol of their survival since the accident. If anyone could save them, it was Susan. "Any news, Doctor?" Ben asked. Susan hesitated. "We're making progress on extending our oxygen supplies. I've got a team setting up more plant beds in Cargo Bay 3. She didn't mention that even with these measures, they were only buying weeks, not the years they would need. The captain would make the full announcement tomorrow. For now, let them have their hope. Back on Earth, Alan couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the distress call in his mind. After his shift ended, he went to the apartment of his old friend, Olivia Martinez. She was a journalist who had once covered the space program before budget cuts had reduced public interest. "You look terrible," she said when she opened the door. "What's wrong?" "I need to show you something," Alan said, "but not here." They walked to a small park nearby. It was early morning and the place was empty. Alan played the recording for her. Olivia listened, her expression growing more serious with each word. "The government told everyone that mission never launched," she said when it finished. "I know, my supervisor ordered me to delete the recording. This isn't just a mistake, Alan. This is a cover-up." Olivia's eyes were wide with realization. 5,000 people just abandoned out there. "Why would they lie about it?" Alan asked. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." Olivia stood up, determination in her face. "And then we're going to tell everyone. Those people deserve better than to be forgotten." As the sun rose over the city, Alan and Olivia made a pact. They would uncover the truth and break the silence. They didn't know yet that their decision would change the course of human history, or that they were starting a race against time to save thousands of lives among the stars. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Olivia's small apartment. Papers and digital screens covered her coffee table. Alan sat across from her, his eyes red from lack of sleep. They had been working for 2 days straight, digging into government records and speaking with old contacts. "Look at this," Olivia said, pointing to a budget report on her screen. 6 months ago, the government moved billions of dollars from the space exploration program to something called Project Guardian. Alan leaned forward. "What's Project Guardian?" "That's the thing. It's classified. But I found mentions of it in some military documents my source leaked last year." She pulled up another file. "It looks like they're building some kind of space platform with weapons. They abandoned 5,000 people to build a space weapon?" Alan's voice rose in disbelief. Olivia nodded grimly. "And the man behind it seems to be Defense Secretary George Baker. His signature is on all these orders." Alan stood up and paced the small room. "We need to go public with this. Now." "It's not that simple," Olivia warned. "We need solid proof that the Endeavor is really out there. Your recording isn't enough, they'll just say it's fake." "Then how do we get proof?" Olivia thought for a moment. "I know someone, a former astronaut who still has friends in the space program. He might be able to help us." "On the Endeavor, Captain." Carter stood before the gathered crowd in the main hall. Every available settler and crew member was there, packed tightly together. The air was already starting to feel thinner, even though Susan's team had only just started reducing oxygen levels to conserve supplies. "I won't lie to you," William said, his voice steady despite the weight in his chest. "Earth has abandoned us. There will be no rescue mission." A wave of gasps and cries swept through the crowd. A baby started crying somewhere in the back. "With our current supplies, we have about 3 months of life support remaining. Dr. Miller and her team are working on ways to extend that, but I need to be honest about our situation." A man pushed to the front of the crowd. "You're telling us we're all going to die out here, that they just left us to die?" His face was red with anger and fear. William met his gaze. "I'm telling you that the government has abandoned us, but I'm not giving up, and I don't want any of you to give up either." Susan stepped forward to stand beside him. "We're setting up additional hydroponics labs to increase oxygen production. We're also looking at ways to repair the power core. It's a long shot, but a long shot isn't good enough," someone shouted from the crowd. More angry voices joined in. William raised his hands. "I understand your fear. I share it. But panic won't help us survive. We need to work together now more than ever." Slowly the crowd quieted. A woman near the front spoke up. "What can we do to help?" William felt a small spark of hope. "We need everyone with engineering or science background to join Dr. Miller's teams. Everyone else can help convert spaces for growing plants or assist with rationing supplies." As the crowd began to talk among themselves, Susan leaned close to William. "You didn't tell them about the message you're sending to Earth." "Because it probably won't work," he said quietly. "The likelihood of anyone receiving it, let alone doing anything about it, is too small to give them false hope." But he had sent it anyway, a detailed account of their situation, broadcast on all frequencies. A message in a bottle tossed into the vast ocean of space. Alan and Olivia drove for 3 hours to reach a small house nestled in the woods. It belonged to Daniel Baker, a former astronaut who had commanded 5 space missions before retiring 10 years ago. Daniel was in his 60s now, with gray hair and weathered skin, but his eyes were still sharp and alert. He invited them inside, after Olivia explained who they were and why they had come. "The Endeavor," Daniel said, looking at the recording Alan had brought. "I had friends on that mission, good people." "Then you believe us?" Olivia asked. "You believe they're really out there?" Daniel nodded slowly. "The government said the mission was scrubbed, but I always had my doubts. Too many of my old colleagues suddenly went quiet about it." He looked up at them. "You realize what you're getting into, right? This goes all the way to the top." "We know it's dangerous," Alan said, "but 5,000 lives are at stake." Daniel studied them for a long moment before making a decision. "I still have access to some private satellite networks, friends who owe me favors. If the Endeavor is out there, we can find it." For the next few hours, Daniel made calls and accessed systems on a secure computer. Finally, he showed them a screen with orbital tracking data. "There," he said, pointing to a small dot moving slowly against the backdrop of stars. "That's the Endeavor. It's exactly where it should be if it launched on schedule 6 months ago." Olivia stared at the screen, her heart pounding. "We have proof." "What do we do now?" Alan asked. Daniel's expression darkened. "Be careful. Very careful. The moment you go public with this, you'll become targets." As if on cue, Olivia's phone buzzed. It was a text from her editor. "Someone broke into your apartment. Everything's trashed. Police asking questions about you." She showed the message to the others. "They know we're looking into this." Daniel walked to a cabinet and pulled out an old metal box. Inside were cash, fake IDs, and a satellite phone. "Old habits," he explained. "When you've been to space, you learn to be prepared for anything." He handed them the box. "You'll need to disappear for a while, but first we need more allies. I know some people, former engineers, astronauts, scientists who left the program when the government started cutting missions." "A network," Olivia said, understanding. Daniel nodded. "People who still believe that space exploration is about discovery, not weapons. People who would never leave others to die among the stars." As night fell over the forest, the 3 of them made plans. They didn't know yet how they would save the people on the Endeavor, but they knew one thing for certain. They had to break the government's silence, whatever the cost. 2 weeks had passed since Alan and Olivia met Daniel. They now worked from an old hunting cabin in the mountains, far from the city and its surveillance cameras. The small space was crowded with equipment, computers, communication devices, and screens showing news from around the world. "We've made contact with 23 former space program workers," Alan said, updating their progress, "plus 7 private company engineers who want to help." Olivia nodded, but her eyes stayed on her screen. "It's still not enough. We need to reach millions of people, not dozens." Daniel walked in with fresh coffee. His old NASA connections had proven valuable. Through them, they had confirmed that the Endeavor's distress signals were still coming, growing weaker each day. "My friend at the Johnson Space Center says the government is tracking the Endeavor," Daniel said. "They know exactly where it is and that people are still alive on board." Olivia slammed her hand on the table. "Then why aren't they doing anything?" "Because Project Guardian is more important to them," Alan said bitterly. They've already spent too much to turn back. They fell silent, each lost in thought. The question that haunted them all was the same. How do you save people who are millions of miles away in space? We can't build our own rocket, Daniel said, answering the unspoken question. But there are 3 private space companies that might have the technology to reach the Endeavor. If enough people demand action, Olivia suddenly sat up straight. That's it. We need to make it impossible for them to keep this secret. Her eyes were bright with a new idea. The World Cup final is next week. 3 billion people will be watching. Alan understood immediately. If we could interrupt that broadcast with proof the Endeavor is out there, Daniel finished, the whole world would know. On the Endeavor, the mood had changed. The initial panic after the captain's announcement had given way to a quiet determination. Everyone had a job now. Even children helped tend the new plant gardens growing in every available space. Susan Miller had barely slept in days. She stood in what had once been the ship's gym, now converted into a forest of leafy plants. The oxygen levels were still dropping, but more slowly than before. The carrots are doing well, said Frank Peterson, a farmer who now led the growing teams. Not enough to feed everyone, but the extra oxygen helps. Susan checked her tablet. We're down to 78 days of life support at current usage. Your plants are buying us time, Frank. Neither of them said what they were both thinking. Time for what? Without rescue, the end would still come, just a little later. In his quarters, Captain William Carter recorded daily messages to Earth, even though he had received no response. It gave him purpose. Today he spoke directly to whoever might be listening. This is day 47 since the asteroid strike. We are still alive. We are still fighting. If anyone on Earth cares, if anyone is listening, we need help. The people on this ship deserve to live. After finishing his recording, William made his daily rounds. He visited each section of the ship, talking with people, offering encouragement. It was harder each day to maintain hope, but he refused to stop trying. In the medical bay, Dr. Eric Johnson was tending to a young woman who had collapsed from exhaustion. More people are getting sick, Eric told William quietly. The lower oxygen levels affect everyone, but especially those with respiratory issues. William looked at the patient. Is she going to be okay? For now. But in another month? Eric didn't finish his sentence. William put a hand on his shoulder. Keep doing what you can. That's all any of us can do. As he left the medical bay, William's tablet beeped. It was a message from Susan asking him to come to the communications center immediately. When he arrived, Susan was standing with 2 communications officers. Their faces showed something William hadn't seen in weeks. Excitement. What is it? He asked. We received a message, Susan said, her voice trembling slightly. From Earth. William's heart jumped. From the government? Susan shook her head. No, it's not official. It says, we hear you. We see you. We're coming for you. Signed, Humanity. Is this some kind of joke? William asked, not daring to hope. The signal came through the private channel, not the government bands, said one of the officers. Someone on Earth is listening to us, Captain. For the first time in weeks, William felt something other than despair. It wasn't much, just a simple message from an unknown sender, but it was something. Send a reply, he ordered. Tell them we're still here, and we're waiting. Back on Earth, the day of the World Cup final arrived. Olivia, Alan, and a team of hackers were gathered in a warehouse filled with broadcasting equipment. Their plan was dangerous, potentially illegal, but they had run out of options. The broadcast signal is being routed through 5 major satellites, explained Grace Ward, a former programmer for a TV network. We can piggyback on the signal for about 3 minutes before they shut us down. Daniel had provided them with footage from the Endeavor, pre-launch videos of the families and crew, combined with the actual distress signals they had intercepted. They had assembled it into a short but powerful presentation that would be impossible to ignore. Are we sure about this? Alan asked, looking at the others. Once we do this, there's no going back. Those people have been waiting for help for almost 2 months, Olivia said firmly. We've tried every official channel, no one is listening. They all nodded. The decision was made. As the World Cup game reached halftime, 3 billion viewers around the world were suddenly shown something unexpected. The soccer field disappeared, replaced by the faces of the Endeavor's crew and colonists. Their distress messages played, followed by government documents showing the deliberate abandonment. The final image was simple: the coordinates of the Endeavor and the words, "They were left to die. Will humanity stay silent?" Within minutes, the signal was cut. Government officials scrambled to call it a hoax, but they were too late. The truth was out, spreading across social media faster than any censorship could contain it. People around the world saw the faces of those abandoned in space. They heard their voices, and they refused to stay silent. The world erupted in outrage after the World Cup broadcast. People gathered in the streets of major cities holding signs with pictures of the Endeavor crew. Online, the hashtag #OrcsSaveTheEndeavor trended globally. Governments faced demands from their citizens to take action. Olivia, Alan, and their allies watched the response with a mixture of hope and fear. They had gone into hiding immediately after the broadcast, knowing authorities would be looking for them. "The private space companies are speaking out," Alan said, showing the others his tablet. The CEOs of 3 major companies had issued statements, condemning the abandonment and pledging resources toward a rescue. Daniel looked troubled. "Resources aren't enough. We need a ship that can reach the Endeavor in time, and nothing like that exists yet." A woman stepped forward from the back of the room. Her name was Lisa Clark, a physicist who had been working with them for the past, week. She was quiet, brilliant, and had rarely spoken until now. "Actually, that's not entirely true," she said. All eyes turned to her. "I was working on an experimental fusion drive before the government cut our funding. With some modifications, it could achieve up to 10% of light speed. That would be fast enough to reach the Endeavor in time," Daniel said, excitement in his voice. Lisa nodded. "In theory, but we never built a full-scale prototype. It would take resources, facilities we don't have access to." "Maybe we do now," Olivia said. She pulled up news footage of protesters surrounding a private space company's headquarters. The CEO was addressing the crowd, promising to help. "The world is watching. The private sector is responding. We just need to bring them your design." On the Endeavor, Captain William stood in the communication center. Since the mysterious message from humanity, they had received dozens more. People from all over Earth were sending them signals of support. "We're tracking news broadcasts from Earth," said Sam Green, the communications officer. "Something big happened. The whole world seems to know about us now." William could hardly believe it. "Can you show me?" Sam brought up a series of news clips on the screen. William watched footage of massive protests, of people demanding action from their governments. He saw images of his own crew being shown to crowds, heard their distress messages being broadcast. "Someone told the world about us," William said, his voice barely above a whisper. Susan came rushing into the room. "Captain, you need to see this." She pulled up another transmission on a different screen. It showed a woman in a lab coat standing beside a tall, dark-haired man. "This is Dr. Lisa Clark speaking to the crew of the Endeavor," the woman said. "We're developing a rescue ship using a new propulsion system. Hold on. We're coming for you." The man stepped forward. "I'm Peter Young, CEO of Astral Technologies. We're converting our Mars mission prototype for your rescue. We need details about your life support status, crew condition, and exact coordinates." William couldn't speak for a moment. He looked at Susan, who had tears in her eyes. "Send them everything," he finally managed to say. "And tell the crew and passengers, tell everyone." The next few days were a blur of activity both on Earth and the Endeavor. A coalition formed outside of government control. Private companies, volunteer engineers, and international space agencies working together. They called themselves Operation Lifeline. Lisa's fusion drive design became the centerpiece of the rescue plan. Engineers worked around the clock to adapt it to an existing ship frame. The prototype that had been intended for a Mars mission was gutted and rebuilt to travel much faster and carry more people back to Earth. On the 7th day after the World Cup broadcast, Defense Secretary George Baker called a press conference. "This rogue rescue operation is endangering national security," he said, his face stern. "I am ordering the immediate cessation of all unauthorized space activities related to the so-called Endeavour situation." No one listened. When military forces were sent to seize the launch facilities, they were met by thousands of ordinary citizens who formed human shields around the spaceport. Leading them was Catherine Winters, a retired Navy pilot who had lost her sister on the Endeavour. "No one gets left behind," she told reporters as she stood in front of the gates. "That's what we believe. That's what humanity stands for." The soldiers, faced with peaceful civilians singing and holding candles, eventually stood down. Many joined, the protesters instead. Day by day, the oxygen levels on the Endeavour continued to drop. Despite all their efforts with the plants, they were fighting a losing battle against time. In the medical bay, more beds were filled each day. William visited the sick daily, trying to keep their spirits up. "Help is coming," he told them. "Just hold on a little longer." Dr. Eric Johnson pulled him aside after one such visit. "Captain, I need to be honest with you. At our current oxygen levels, people will start dying within 2 weeks. The weakest first. The elderly, the children, those with health issues." William closed his eyes briefly. "What can we do? We've already shut down every non-essential system. The only option left is to put some people into emergency hibernation. It would reduce their oxygen needs by 80%. Is it safe?" Eric hesitated. "Not entirely. There are risks. But it might be the only way to keep everyone alive until rescue comes." William made one of the hardest decisions of his life that day. They created hibernation units in the coldest parts of the ship and asked for volunteers. Over 1,000 people stepped forward, mostly the strongest adults, giving up their share of oxygen for the children and the weak. Susan helped monitor the hibernation pods. "It's working," she told William after the first day. "Oxygen levels have stabilized." William nodded, looking at the rows of sleeping people. "They're still betting their lives that rescue will come in time." "It will," Susan said firmly. "Did you see the latest message? The rescue ship has been named the Hope. They've started final testing of the engines." William put his hand on the glass of the nearest pod. Inside was a young man who had given up his place so his elderly parents could have more oxygen. "Then we'll make sure everyone is still here when it arrives." Back on Earth, the Hope was taking shape. Lisa Clark hadn't slept in days, working alongside hundreds of engineers to make her theoretical design a reality. The fusion drive glowed with a blue light as they ran the first full power test. "It works," she said, her voice filled with wonder, as the energy readings stabilized. "It actually works." Daniel, who had been helping coordinate between the different teams, smiled for the first time in weeks. "How fast can it go?" "If these readings are correct, just over 10% of light speed. We can reach the Endeavour in 14 days. Olivia, who had been documenting everything for the world to see, put down her camera for a moment. "Then we still have a chance to save them all." The countdown to launch had begun. The Hope rose into the sky on a pillar of blue fire. Millions watched the launch live, holding their breath as the ship climbed higher and higher. In mission control, Lisa Clark and her team monitored every reading from the experimental drive. "Engine, temperature stable," one engineer called out. "Fusion reaction holding at optimal levels." When the Hope reached orbit, a cheer went up that could be heard for miles around the launch site. But everyone knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come when they activated the main drive for the journey to the Endeavour. Peter, young, the CEO who had given his company's resources to the mission, stood beside the flight director. "How long until we can make the jump to full speed?" 6 hours, the flight director said. "We need to run final checks on all systems." Those 6 hours felt like days to the rescue team. Finally, the moment came. The captain of the Hope, John Rivera, gave the order. "Activate main fusion drive." The engine came to life, pushing the Hope faster than any human ship had ever traveled before. The stars seemed to stretch as they accelerated to 10% of the speed of light. We're on our way. John sent a message back to Earth. Estimated. Arrival at the Endeavor in 14 days. On the Endeavor, each day became a fierce battle for survival. More people had entered hibernation, bringing the total to nearly 2,000 sleeping in the cold pods. But even with these measures, the oxygen levels continued to fall slowly. William and Susan worked with the remaining crew to shut down more sections of the ship, crowding everyone into the central areas where the air was still breathable. Except plants aren't producing enough oxygen anymore, Susan told William as they checked the latest readings. Too many are dying from the cold and low light. We had to reduce power to the grow lamps. William looked at the countdown timer they had, set up in the main hall. It showed 12 days until the Hope's predicted arrival. Can we make it? If nothing else goes wrong, maybe, Susan said. She didn't sound convinced. Something did go wrong the next day. A power relay failed, cutting off life support to an entire section where 300 people were sheltering. They had to evacuate them to already crowded areas, putting even more strain on the remaining resources. Dr. Eric Johnson approached William with a grim expression. Captain, we've had our first deaths. 2 elderly passengers and a child with a heart condition. The low oxygen. William closed his eyes for a moment. Make sure their families have support, and don't spread this information generally. We need to maintain hope. But hope was becoming harder to find. By the 8th day of the Hope's journey, 27 people had died on the Endeavor. More than half the remaining crew and passengers were now in hibernation, taking the risk of never waking up rather than continuing to consume precious oxygen. William recorded what he feared might be his final message to Earth. This is Captain William Carter of the Endeavor. We're doing everything we can to hold on. If the Hope doesn't reach us in time, tell our families we love them. And thank you, all of you on Earth who tried to help us. You gave us something precious in our final days, the knowledge that humanity had not forgotten us. The Hope was pushing its engines to the limit. The fusion drive glowed dangerously bright as they squeezed every bit of speed from it. The containment field is showing stress fractures, one of the engineers reported. If we keep going at this speed, we risk a breach. Captain John Rivera faced a terrible choice. Slowing down meant more people would die on the Endeavor before they arrived. Maintaining speed risked the entire rescue mission failing. What would happen if the containment field fails, he asked Lisa, who had joined the mission as the drive's designer. Best case? The drive shuts down and we drift. Worst case? She hesitated. The fusion reaction could escape containment. We'd be destroyed instantly. John thought of the 5,000 people waiting for them. Can we strengthen the field somehow? Buy us more time at this speed? Lisa considered for a moment. There's one possibility. We could reroute power from life support on the lower decks. It would mean those areas would get cold with minimal oxygen. Uncomfortable but survivable for the crew. Do it, John ordered. And tell the crew in those sections what's happening. This has to be voluntary. Every crew member volunteered. They huddled in cold, dim sections of the Hope, breathing thin air, knowing that every minute of discomfort meant lives saved on the Endeavor. By the 12th day, the situation on the Endeavor had become desperate. Only 500 people remained, awake, including William, Susan, and the essential crew. They had gathered in the central command area, the only section still with full life support. Oxygen levels at 17% and falling, Susan reported, her voice weak from the thin air. We have maybe 8 hours left at current levels. William looked around at the faces of his crew. Many had friends or family in hibernation. All had worked tirelessly to keep everyone alive. The Hope will be here in 6 hours according to their last message, he said. We just need to hold on a little longer. They sat together, saving their strength, speaking little to conserve oxygen. Hours passed like days. Finally, Sam at communications sat up straight. Captain, I'm getting a signal. It's the Hope. They're here. On the main screen, they saw it. A ship approaching rapidly, glowing blue from its fusion drive. It was the most beautiful sight William had ever seen. The Hope matched course with the Endeavor, connecting to their main airlock. The rescue team came aboard wearing oxygen masks and carrying extra tanks. "Captain Carter?" A woman in a flight suit approached William. "I'm Commander Rita Nelson from the Hope. We've come to take you home." The evacuation began immediately. The rescue team had brought specialized medical units for those in hibernation. It took 3 days to transfer everyone, the living, the hibernating, and even the bodies of those who hadn't survived. No one would be left behind. As the last shuttle prepared to leave the Endeavor, William stood in the doorway looking back at the ship that had been their home and nearly their tomb. Susan waited beside him. "We should go, Captain," she said gently. William nodded. "I keep thinking about how close we came to being forgotten. If those people on Earth hadn't spoken up." "But they did," Susan said. "When it mattered most, humanity refused to stay silent." 6 weeks later, the Hope appeared in Earth's orbit. Thousands of boats filled the ocean below, their lights visible from space as a welcome. The survivors were home. On the ground, Alan and Olivia watched the landing on a large screen set up in a public square. Around them, people cheered and cried as the first passengers walked out of the rescue ship. Daniel stood beside them, his eyes wet with tears. "We did it," he said simply. Government officials who had supported the abandonment now faced investigations and trials. New laws were passed ensuring no mission would ever be abandoned again. The Carter Protocol became standard for all space agencies. No human would ever be left to die in space. As Captain William Carter finally stepped off the Hope, reporters surrounded him. "Captain Carter, how does it feel to be home?" one asked. William looked around at the crowd, at all the faces of people who had fought for them, who had refused to let them die. "It feels like I finally understand what humanity truly is," he said. "Not the people who left us behind, but the ones who moved heaven and earth to bring us home."